Hello, my name is Johannes Widodo. I'm from Singapore, from National University of Singapore. I'm also a founding member and active member of ICOMOS Singapore. Today, I was asked to talk a bit about the so-called cultural mapping and how cultural mapping actually is very important in area of heritage management. Why cultural mapping is important? Cultural mapping actually is a valuable tool for identifying the community strength and resources. So by this understanding of the community strengths and resources, we can help the communities move into the planning and implementation phase by identifying early the resources, efficiencies, and links within art, cultural group, as well as the common aspiration and values. So basically, we are looking into two aspects of heritage. One is the tangible cultural heritage, and second is the intangible cultural heritage. The tangible cultural heritage includes movable cultural heritage, like paintings, sculptures, coin, manuscripts. Immovable cultural heritage, for example, like monuments, archaeological sites, human settlements, architecture, etc. And also underwater cultural heritage like shipwreck, underwater ruins, and underwater cities. Where the intangible cultural heritage includes oral traditions, performing arts, ritual, lifestyle, and so on. So the basic principles of cultural mapping actually is the comprehensiveness. We want to understand everything in comprehensive manner. At the same time, also link it to the ground, to the sites, to the city, to the settlements. And most important things in this aspect of cultural mapping is that we put human or community at the center. So what is a cultural map? Cultural map actually is a map, just like a normal map. It consists of two parts. One is the data recording or data capture. And then second is how we communicate those data through visualizations, like cartographic manners, or even use digital methods, and so on. The methods of mapping can be very simple or can be very sophisticated by manual, digital, or hybrid mode, by one of the interviews and the site observations, one by one interviews, or by big data harvesting. And then the visualization itself can be very simple or sophisticated. It doesn't matter as long as it is comprehensive. So what should we map? When I said comprehensive, it means we need to look into all, without exceptions, all attributes of both tangible and intangible heritage. Place where the movable and immovable cultural objects are found. We pin it on the ground. We put it on the map. So we have to know the exact position and coordinates. Place where cultural practices like ritual or secular took place. For example, like processions or annual celebrations. And then we also need to record all the physical features like landscape, historical site, structures, monuments, dwellings, shops, street furnitures. We also have to record the material culture, all the artifact, craft, tool, products, food. So intangible practices like language, ritual, festivals. Also meaning, like history, folktale, local knowledge. So all of these are very important, the comprehensiveness, and also the positions of the researcher or persons who do the mapping. We should pause or put ourselves, if we are the observer or the surveyor, on a neutral positions. Try not to be partisans. Try not to filter everything based on your own preference or your own agenda, but try to free yourself from these influences. So try to be neutral. Now, how to do cultural mapping process? How to make a cultural map? Actually, it's very simple. The main tools for making cultural map is our brain, our eyes, our senses, the 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, ability to smell, ability to perceive, both rational and irrational. So that's why on the left figures, we can show you the right brain and left brain. We use both brains actually to capture those elements during the mapping. Second is the traditional methods, the analog methods. Take notes with pens. Well, of course, you can use digital means, but notes is important. A piece of paper is important to sketch, to record. And of course, now we have the so-called smartphone. We can do anything like recording, making, taking pictures, taking videos, upload it to the cloud, and so on. So all these are normal tools that we need for the cultural mapping, that everybody actually can have this. And these are the steps. So can be more than 10 steps, but if I simplify the steps, the step number 1, very important starting point, is to do the archival research, like old photos, like newspapers, films, postcard, old maps, book articles, and so on. It can be from the library, you can Google, you can do the research from the digital libraries, from internet, from the office of a newspaper, even the photo album from a family, private diaries, and so on. So we collect everything to do the archival research as much as we can, as deep as we can. Of course, now we can have so-called the big data as well. So social media, use apps, use different methods to harvest the information from Instagram, from Twitter, from Facebook, and so on. So this is the step 1. Step 2, do on-site observations. You have to be there, on-site, and then do sketching, take photos, drawings, talk to people. All this is to complete the archival research by a real comprehensive real-time observations. And then step number 3, do the spatial plan analysis or maps layering. So one of the very important informations for the mapping is the map itself. Well, sometimes a certain city doesn't have enough maps, but some cities, for example, like Kuala Lumpur or Malacca, has a very good old maps. So use this map, collect those maps, scan, digitize the maps, and do the layering. Coordinate the scale so you can see the same road, the same coordinates match on the same place from maps from the chronological layers from the past to the present. So if necessary, we also able to redraw the maps or make a special maps. We do the special cartographic exercise to complete the map. And then we start doing the spatial analysis, look into the streets, the zonings, functions, and so on. Step number 4, do the synchronic or chronological and diachronic readings. Diachronic readings means between scale level, the relationship between buildings and the neighborhood, between neighborhood and the city, between the city and the natural landscape, for example. And also look into the different layers, the physical layers, social layers, and the symbolic layers of the same locations. So basically, this is a kind of 3-dimensional analytical process to do the analysis of the relationships between elements on the maps. Step number 5, do audio-visual recording, photography, videography, and sound recording. Why? Because this is important for the presentations. To visualize through different mediums, It could be printed mediums or digital mediums, videos, clips, and so on, to communicate the result of the mapping. Number 6, do interviews with the members of the community, with the expert, with anyone who understands, who can give a kind of understanding, in-depth understanding about the place, about an event, about the historical event, for example. But not just from the expert, but most importantly is from the owner of the place itself, people who dwell on that place, like the community, for generations. You have to talk to different age groups, from the elders to the young, even to the children, because across age is also a very important aspect in terms of correct and comprehensive reading. Also across the racial groups, not just talking to the Chinese, but also talking to the Malays, also talking to the Indians, also talking to the Eurasians, or different group of people like Javanese, the Hakkas and the Teochews, the Hokkiens. The more complete sets of interviews that you have, the more comprehensive and complete set of data that we can acquire. Step number 7, do statistical analysis, measuring, counting, sampling. Number 8, do evaluation of significance and vulnerability or threats. Well, it's something like SWOT analysis. So we understand the potentials, we understand the strength, we understand also the threat and the weaknesses about a certain place on the different skill levels. And then do overall layering of everything, and draw the connections. And then the last step is do the planning, design, and productions of deliverables. How you want to present those result of the mapping through different means. There is no limit on how we can present the result of the mapping. Do creative things, not just very boring types of just a single map and single drawings. No, probably it's a set of informations, and you can put it in the website. You can put it in the YouTube, which connects with a different social media platform, for example. So this is one of the illustrations how to do the comprehensive inventory. One of the easiest way is just do the pinning. And we can use the cheapest way, the free Google My Maps apps. So you can go to Google My Maps, and then you create a map, and then you can put a pin on the circular locations to link your data, your informations with that pin of a certain place. So inside that pin, you can upload illustration, photo, address, title, whatever. And these informations can be linked to the cloud, the storage of your data that you have digitized and put together in a very systematic manner on the cloud. So it's become accessible to everyone. So when you click the pin, certain locations can bring you to the links to all these storage spaces. So this is the steps in the analysis and synthesis process. Identify all the main layers of the site: physical, sociological, ideological, from the distant past, from the recent past to the present. And then start to look into the narrative of the landscape, the narrative of the circulations, the narrative of the built form. Or I put red color here just to signify that this is the physical aspect. And you can add some more physical aspects: circulations, landscape, topography, and so on. And then the second set of analysis is looking into the narrative of the community, economy, and administrative. For example, like the political boundary. For example, like the income groups, where the poor, the middle class live, where is the upper class or the rich people live. We are also talking about the different racial groups, for example, special ethnic areas. So this is part of the sociological mapping. And then the analysis number, the other one is on the green color here. related to belief, related to memory, related to love of a place, which is more emotional, to represent the so-called the ideological aspect. Of course, it can be beyond 9. It can be more than that. So feel free to develop your own sets of analysis and categories for synthesis. And the reconstruction of the chronological development and change is also important to connect what happened in the past into the present and what is the reason of transformations, whether it's a natural disaster, it could be a man-made disaster, war, for example, terrorist attack, and also the projections to the future. So in simple terms, so you arrange the information chronologically from the distant past, recent past to the present of all of the above elements that I mentioned before. And then identify and evaluate of significant moments, elements, and narratives of the study area across historical timeline and its physical anchor or signifier in a specific space and place. Then analyze the vulnerabilities of the study site and the source of those vulnerabilities. Either it's a climate change, either it's a threat from the developers or development threat, maybe it's a threat from the master plans of the city. Maybe the threat also come from the internal of the community itself, lack of understanding, poverty, because this area is being neglected, for example, or subject to certain unsensitive development and so on. So you can refer to UNESCO recommendation on historic urban landscape and ICOMOS guidelines on heritage impact assessment for this kind of analysis. So this is one of the example how you layer this. So you layer the so-called the master plan, the development plan with land ownerships, for example, and then you insert the so-called this result of the mapping on these layers. So imagine this is like the layers on the Photoshop files or AutoCAD or SketchUp, if you're familiar with the graphic software. And layering means that you put the different layers for different informations, and you can see through all those layers. You can flatten or unflatten the layers, so you can see very clearly the relationships within a different aspect and different scale level. Now, let's move into the why we need this cultural mapping and how this cultural mapping will be useful to manage the heritage of the city. So this is how we implement the cultural mapping in heritage management. First, the cultural mapping can be translated directly into the so-called the HUL, or the historic urban landscape. So the comprehensive cultural mapping is needed to develop official instruments for the conservation and development plans. And HUL is suggested by UNESCO as a tools for managing change. How these layerings are able to give a good information for the planners that they can do the planning for the future more sensitively. So if there is a conflict between the future plan and the historic urban landscape, we can invoke the mechanism called the HIA, the Heritage Impact Assessment. So about the HUL, is adopted by UNESCO General Assembly in 2011. And all these resources can be available freely. You can be downloaded from the links. You can just Googling. And these recommendations seeks to increase the sustainability of planning and design interventions by taking into account the existing built environment, intangible heritage, cultural diversity, socio-economic and environmental factors, along with the local community values. So these recommendations recommend that member states of UNESCO and relevant local authorities identify the specific context, critical step to implement this mechanism, to undertake comprehensive survey and mapping, to reach consensus using participatory planning and stakeholders on consultations, of what values to be protected, what values should be transmitted for future generations, and then to determine the attributes that carry these values. Then to assess vulnerability of these attributes to social economic stresses and the impact of climate change. And then to integrate the urban heritage values and vulnerability status into a wider framework of a city development, which shall provide indication of areas of heritage sensitivity that require careful attention to planning, design, and implementation of development projects. And then to prioritize action for conservation and development. And finally, to establish the appropriate partnerships and local management framework for each of the identified projects for conservation and development. So basically, the basic benefits and the importance of cultural mapping cannot be underestimated. It's not just about mapping the memory of the past. It's not just for the sake of tourism, but more importantly, this is a very important steps in terms of the formulations of planning legal instruments and also protections legal instruments that may be able to preserve, to help us to preserve the urban heritage, but at the same time also to make sure that the development will not harm our heritage that shall be continued to the next generations.